We've buried truck stops and whole chains on this channel. Today we buried the trucks themselves. Because if you've been out here long enough, you didn't just watch places disappear. You watched entire trucks vanish off the interstate. Brands that built this country and models every driver knew by their headlights at night. Gone now, most of them for good. Some of these companies went bankrupt in the biggest collapse of their day. Some got bought by a bigger name and quietly strangled. One of them got killed by a single change to a federal length law, and it took an entire style of truck down with it. The kind every one of you either drove or swore you'd never drive. We're counting down 20 of them, from the rare ones only the old hands remember, to the one whose death every driver over 50 felt personally. And stick around to the end because there's a bonus, a legend everybody assumes is dead that is somehow still being built today. These are Class 8 trucks only, real road tractors, the ones that pulled America's freight. Let's get into it. Studebaker built wagons before America had highways, actual covered wagons that carried settlers west. And that heritage is exactly why its ending stings. This was a company that survived the Civil War, survived the switch from horses to engines, and built solid trucks right through the middle of the 20th century. Everything from light pickups up into the heavier commercial classes that hauled real freight. Drivers trusted them because Studebaker had been keeping its word since the 1800s. But the car side of the business was bleeding money by the late 50s, and when the passenger cars went down, they took everything with them. Studebaker built its last vehicles in 1966, closing the South Bend, Indiana plant that had been running for over a century. Think about that timeline. A company older than the Transcontinental Railroad, gone in the same decade as the moon landing. What killed Studebaker wasn't a bad truck, it was a car division that dragged the whole operation under, and the trucks died as collateral damage. Today, a Studebaker on the road is a museum piece, trailer to shows, polished by collectors who understand they're looking at a name that connected the wagon train to the interstate and didn't quite make it to the finish line. Almost nobody reading this has seen one in person, and that's the whole point. In 1973, Dodge decided it wanted a piece of the big Class 8 highway market, the long-haul heavy tractor business dominated by Kenworth, Peterbilt, and Mack. So they built the Bighorn, a genuine road tractor with a big Cummins under a proper hood, and they put a chrome Bighorn sheep ornament right up front. It was a real truck. The problem was timing and everything else. Dodge had almost no reputation among serious owner-operators in Class 8. The fuel crisis hit that exact year, and the truck was expensive to build for a company that had no dealer network set up to support big rigs. Production numbers tell the whole story. Somewhere around 260 Bighorns were ever built before Dodge pulled the plug and walked away from heavy trucks entirely in 1975. 260. That's not a production run, that's practically a rounding error, which is exactly why the Bighorn is a legend today, because it's the rarest big rig most drivers have never laid eyes on. A full-sized highway tractor from a company everybody knows that existed for barely 2 years and then vanished so completely that spotting one now is like seeing a ghost with chrome horns. Federal is a name that ran hard for half a century and then evaporated so thoroughly that even a lot of veteran drivers draw a blank on it. Founded in Detroit in 1910, Federal Motor Truck Company spent decades as a serious builder of medium and heavy commercial trucks, the kind of workhorses that hauled freight and served the military through 2 world wars. Federal trucks were assembled rigs, built from the best components a buyer's money could get. Continental and Cummins power, and for a long stretch, they were a genuine competitor in the commercial market. But Federal made the same mistake that killed half this list. It stayed small in an industry that was rapidly becoming a game of scale. As the big builders grew and cut prices through volume, an independent assembler like Federal had no way to keep up, and the company faded out of the truck business by the late 1950s. There was no dramatic bankruptcy headline, no famous last truck. Federal simply got outgrown, the way a corner hardware store gets outgrown by the chains, and the name slipped off the highway one contract at a time. 50 years of building America's trucks, and today you'd be lucky to find a driver under 60 who can tell you Federal was ever a truck at all. International Harvester was one of the giants, a company that built everything from farm tractors to Class 8 highway tractors, and two of its trucks earned real devotion before the axe fell. The Emeryville, named for the California plant that built it, was International's serious West Coast cabover in the 50s and 60s, a truck built to haul heavy over the mountains. Then came the Transtar, International's big conventional and cabover line through the 70s, a truck he saw everywhere on the interstate hauling for the biggest fleets in the country. These were not niche trucks, they were mainstream heavy haulers with a loyal following. But International Harvester nearly destroyed itself in a brutal 5-month strike in 1979 and 1980, right as the economy tanked and interest rates went through the roof, and the company never fully recovered its footing in the heavy truck market. It reorganized, renamed itself Navistar, and along the way the old model names got retired and the truck lineup got rebuilt around the different future. The Transtar and the Emeryville names faded into history, remembered now mostly by the drivers who ran them hard and the collectors who keep a few alive. If this list is bringing back some memories, do me a favor and tap the like button. It's free and it takes about as long as a cold air brake test on a July morning. Real quick, the Trucker Insider shop is open. 2 things you need to see. First, the I Survived Interstate 80T, for anybody who's fought that Elk Mountain wind between Laramie and Rawlins with the trailer trying to change lanes without asking. If the Wyoming wind couldn't flip you, this shirt is already yours. Then there's the snapback to match, embroidered Wyoming Edie shield on the front, mesh back, and yes, it actually breathes in July, which is more than we can say for that stretch of road. There's a whole lot more waiting for you too, veteran gear, dog tags, the works. Every order keeps this channel independent and pays for the digging. Shops at truckerinsiderusa.com. Now, back to it. General Motors built heavy trucks for decades, and GMC's cabovers hold a special place in cabover history. First came the model everybody nicknamed the Cracker Box, a squared-off little cabover from the late 50s and 60s that looked exactly like its nickname, a cracker box with wheels. And drivers either loved it or cursed it, sometimes in the same trip. Then, in 1969, GMC replaced it with the Astro, a sleeker, more modern cabover that ran hard through the 70s and 80s, pulling freight coast to coast, often badged as the Chevrolet Titan on the bowtie side of the house. These were real players in the long-haul market. But here's the ending nobody saw coming in the glory days. General Motors decided the heavy truck business wasn't worth the fight. The margins were thin, the competition was vicious, and GM had bigger priorities. So in 1987, it handed its heavy truck operations over to a joint venture with Volvo and walked away from the Class 8 market it had served for generations. The Astro and the Titan died in that handoff. One of the largest corporations on Earth simply decided it didn't want to build big trucks anymore, and 2 solid cabovers disappeared, not because they failed, but because the company that made them lost interest. While GMC's cabovers were running the interstates, the company also built one last great conventional, and it deserves its own spot because of what it represented. The GMC General arrived in the mid-70s as a big, square-nosed, chrome-heavy conventional tractor. GMC's answer to the Kenworths and Peterbilts that owner-operators lusted after. And it was a handsome truck. Set-back front axle, tall hood, the kind of rig a driver was proud to park at the fuel island. The General was GMC saying, we can build a real owner-operator truck too, not just fleet cabovers. It found a genuine following among drivers who wanted something a little different from the usual suspects. But it lived on borrowed time because it was tied to the same GMC heavy truck division that management had already decided was expendable. When GMC dumped its heavy truck operations into the Volvo joint venture in 1987, the General went down with everything else. It's a particular kind of loss because unlike the cabovers, the General was exactly the kind of proud, long-nosed conventional that survived and thrived at every other builder. Kenworth still builds trucks like it. Peterbilt still builds trucks like it. GMC built one, built it well, and then the parent company decided the whole segment wasn't worth its time. The General didn't lose to the market. It lost to a boardroom. Ford built heavy trucks, and if you're under 40, that sentence might surprise you. But for decades, Ford was a serious player in Class 8, and the CL9000 was its flagship cabover. Introduced in 1978, the CL9000 was a genuinely advanced truck for its day, and it had one feature drivers still talk about: an air-suspended cab, so the whole cab rode on a cushion of air to smooth out the punishment of a long day. In a cabover, where you sit right on top of the front axle and feel every seam in the pavement, that air ride was close to a miracle. The CL9000 hauled freight for big fleets across the country and earned real respect. But Ford's heart was never fully in the heavy truck business the way Kenworth's or Mack's was. It was one division among many at a company whose real money came from cars and light pickups. And as the Class 8 market got tougher and the investment required to keep competing got heavier, Ford did the math and decided to leave. In 1997, Ford sold its entire heavy truck line to Freightliner and walked out of Class 8 for good. The CL9000 and everything above it went with the sale. A company that helped motorize America decided big trucks weren't its fight anymore. The trucks Ford sold when it left are a story of their own because they didn't exactly die, they got a new name stitched over the old one, which is its own kind of vanishing. The Ford Louisville was a workhorse conventional that ran for decades, and the Aeromax was its aerodynamic long-haul version, a sleek, modern highway tractor that Ford introduced to compete in the aero age of the 90s. These were good trucks with loyal drivers. When Freightliner's parent company bought Ford's heavy truck business in 1997, it didn't scrap the Louisville and Aeromax designs. It kept building them, just under a resurrected old name, Sterling, which we'll get to shortly. So a driver who bought a Ford Aeromax in 1996 and a nearly identical truck badged Sterling in 1999 was buying the same rig with a different emblem on the nose. The Ford Blue Oval came off the heavy trucks and never went back on. For the drivers who were brand loyal to Ford, who'd run Ford heavy iron their whole careers, it was a quiet gut punch. The truck rolled on. The name they trusted didn't. And that's a specific kind of loss that shows up again and again on this list, where the steel survives and the identity is what dies. Mack survives, the Bulldog still rolls, but two of its most beloved cabovers are long gone, and they earned their place here. The Mack F model was the company's classic cabover through the 60s and into the 70s, a tough, no-nonsense rig that hauled heavy freight and became one of the defining cabover shapes of its era. Then came the Cruiseliner in the mid-70s, a more modern cabover with a roomier cab, built to keep Mack competitive in the long-haul market as drivers demanded more space and comfort. Both were serious highway trucks with devoted drivers who swore by the Mack toughness underneath. And both fell to the same force that runs like a spine through this entire video, the Surface Transportation Assistance Act of 1982, which we're going to explain properly when we reach number 1, because it didn't just kill individual models, it killed a whole way of building trucks. Mack read the writing on the wall, wound down its cabovers and put its energy into the conventional trucks that the new law favored. The Bulldog adapted and survived, which is more than most names on this list can say. But the F model and the Cruiseliner, the cabovers a generation of Mack drivers cut their teeth in, rolled off into history. And on the subject of things worth keeping around, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. It's free, and the Bulldog would want you to. White Motor Company is coming up later on this list as one of the biggest falls in trucking history, but one of its trucks deserves its own moment first. The White Road Commander was introduced in 1972 as White's heavy-duty highway cabover, built to go head-to-head with Peterbilt, Kenworth, and Freightliner in the long-haul market. And here's the detail that makes it special. It was styled by Larry Shinoda, the same designer who shaped the Corvette Stingray and the Ford Mustang Boss models, a genuine automotive design legend putting his hands on a semi-truck. The Road Commander 2, which came in 1975, had a distinctive split wraparound windshield and clean tapered doors that made it one of the better-looking cabovers on the road. Drivers who ran them remember a truck that felt a cut above. But the Road Commander was tied to White Motor, and White was sliding toward the largest bankruptcy of its day. The truck outlived the company briefly under Volvo's ownership, soldiering on into the early 80s, but the length law that reshaped the whole industry was already turning drivers away from cabovers, and the Road Commander faded with the format it was born into. A Corvette designer's truck killed by a bankruptcy and a change in the law, all at once. Sterling is the ghost of a ghost, a name that died once, got dug up, and died again. The original Sterling Motor Truck Company went back to 1906, an old and respected heavy truck builder that White eventually absorbed decades ago. That name sat in a drawer for years. Then in 1998, after Freightliner's parent company bought Ford's heavy truck business, somebody decided to revive the old Sterling name and slap it on those former Ford trucks, slotting the brand between Freightliner and Western Star in the lineup. So Sterling came back from the dead, badging what used to be Ford Louisvilles and Aeromaxes, and for about a decade it built a real presence, expanding into medium-duty trucks and earning its own drivers. It never quite hit the sales numbers the parent company wanted, and when the economy collapsed in 2008 and the whole trucking industry seized up, Daimler looked at its lineup and decided it had one brand too many. In October of 2008, the company announced it was killing Sterling. It stopped taking orders in early 2009, closed the Ontario plant that spring, and shut the Portland plant the next year. A name that was 100 years old, revived for one more run, snuffed out in a recession. Sterling is the only truck on this list that got to die twice, and somehow both deaths were quiet. They called it the Cadillac of trucks, and for once the nickname was earned. Diamond T started in Chicago in 1905, and while a lot of builders on this list competed on toughness or price, Diamond T competed on beauty. These were the best-looking trucks on the American road for decades, with chrome, sweeping fenders, and a paint and detail quality that made a Diamond T stand out at any truck stop in the country. Owner-operators who wanted the world to know they'd made it bought a Diamond T. It was rolling proof that a working truck could also be a gorgeous object. The company built its own trucks independently and with real pride from 1905 all the way to 1958, when it was bought by White Motor Company. And that purchase was the beginning of the end for the name. White already owned REO, and in 1967 it merged the two proud old brands together into a single operation called Diamond Reo, which we'll get to in a minute. The Diamond T name on its own simply stopped existing in 1967, folded into a combination that honored neither half the way it deserved. 53 years of building the most beautiful trucks in America ended not by failure, but by a merger that treated a legend like a line item. Now we're into the cabovers drivers get emotional about, and the Kenworth K100 Aerodyne is near the top of that list. Kenworth introduced the K100 in 1961, but the truck became a legend in 1976 when it launched the Aerodyne Sleeper, the first factory-built raised-roof cabover sleeper with genuine stand-up headroom inside. Think about what that meant to a long-haul driver in 1976. You could finally stand up in your own truck. And then television made it immortal. The show BJ and the Bear put a driver and his pet chimpanzee in a K100 Aerodyne every week from 1978 to 1981, and a whole generation of kids grew up wanting to drive exactly that truck. The K100 was the cabover as folk hero, the good-looking rebel of the interstate. But the K100 lived and died by the length laws, and after 1982, those laws no longer favored the cabover. Kenworth kept building the K100 for the drivers who stayed loyal to the format, but demand dropped year after year as conventionals took over, and Kenworth finally ended North American K100 production in 2002. The truck that taught America a driver deserved room to stand up, quietly retired after 40 years. Its shape now pure nostalgia for the men who remember standing tall inside one. If the Kenworth K100 was the folk hero cabover, the Peterbilt 352 and its successor the 362 were the artist's choice, the cabovers that owner-operators customize into rolling showpieces. The 352 ran from the late 50s into the early 80s, and the 362 replaced it in 1981 as Peterbilt flagship cabover. These trucks had the classic Peterbilt build quality and that unmistakable Pete look, and drivers poured money into them. Chrome, paint, lights, turning working cabovers into trucks that stopped traffic at every show. A clean Peterbilt cabover was and still is one of the most coveted rigs in all of trucking. But the same wave that took every other cabover on this list came for the Petes too. After the length law changed in 1982, the market swung hard to conventionals, and even a truck as beloved as a Peterbilt cabover couldn't fight the economics forever. Peterbilt built the 362 all the way until 2005, longer than almost anybody else stayed in the cabover game, a testament to how much drivers loved it. When the last 362 rolled off the line, it marked the end of the true American long-haul cabover from the builder that made the most beautiful ones. Today, a restored Peterbilt 352 or 362 is a six-figure trailer queen, worth more than it ever cost new, because they simply don't make that shape anymore, and everyone who loves trucks knows it. Diamond Reo is what you get when you merge two dying legends and hope the sum outlives the parts. It didn't. The name itself is a tombstone with two names on it. REO went all the way back to 1904 and Ransom E. Olds, the same man who founded Oldsmobile, one of the true fathers of the American auto industry, and the REO Speedwagon was such an icon that a rock band took its name decades later. Diamond T, as you just heard, was the Cadillac of trucks. White Motor owned them both, and in 1967 it fused them into Diamond Reo, combining Diamond T's beautiful cabs with REO's respected engineering. On paper, it should have worked. In reality, White was struggling, and it sold Diamond Reo off in 1971 to an investor who ran the new independent company hard for a few years. Despite building genuinely good trucks with an excellent reputation, Diamond Reo was forced into bankruptcy in 1974, buried under about $40 million in debt. There were a couple of afterlives, a small operation in Harrisburg that kept building a handful of trucks a day, later revival attempts, even the name drifting overseas. But the real Diamond Reo, the American heavy truck that carried two of the oldest and proudest names in the business, died in that 1974 bankruptcy. Two legends merged into one, and the one couldn't survive either. For most of the 20th century, White wasn't just a truck brand, it was the truck empire. Founded in Cleveland in 1900, White grew into the largest commercial vehicle producer in the United States. And here's how big it really was. White owned Autocar, White owned Sterling, White owned Diamond T and REO, and it distributed Freightliner through its dealer network. Nearly every other name on this list either belonged to White or eventually touched it. This was the company that consolidated American trucking under one roof, the giant that everyone else measured themselves against. And that's exactly what makes its fall the biggest on this list. White got greedy and overextended, buying up off-road equipment makers and piling on debt through the 60s. And when the oil crisis of the 70s hammered the heavy truck market, the empire couldn't carry its own weight. On September 4th, 1980, White Motor Company filed for bankruptcy in what was then one of the largest bankruptcies in American history. Volvo swept in and bought the American truck assets in 1981 for around $75 million. And the Canadian pieces, including a nameplate called Western Star, went to buyers in Calgary. The White name limped on under Volvo, badged White, then White GMC, until it was finally retired for good in 2021. The company that owned half of American trucking became a footnote in a Swedish company's history. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And nobody in trucking ever fell harder than White. They called Marmon the Rolls-Royce of trucks, and unlike some nicknames, this one was literal company policy. Marmon trucks were built in Texas from 1963 to 1997, and they were nearly handmade, low production, built to a standard of quality and comfort that no mass-market builder could touch. While everybody else was cutting costs, Marmon was hand-fitting aluminum cabs and designing the truck around the driver first, treating the man behind the wheel like he deserved luxury instead of just a seat. Owner-operators who ran Marmons talk about them the way people talk about a custom suit. There was nothing else like it, and everybody who had one knew exactly what they had. But that's also the tragedy, because you cannot survive in the truck business hand-building a few hundred trucks a year, while Freightliner and Kenworth build that many in a week. Marmon had no national dealer network, no volume, no way to compete on price, and as the big builders started adding their own driver comforts, Marmon's one advantage narrowed. The company built its last truck in February of 1997 and leased its Texas production line to Navistar. The Rolls-Royce of trucks died the way a lot of beautiful, uncompromising things die, not because it was bad, but because it was too good to be cheap, and cheap is what the market rewarded. A few are still out there working, driven by people who refuse to let the best truck ever built disappear. In the town of Cortland, New York, they called it Husky Town, USA, because Brockway trucks wore a husky dog on the hood, and the whole town lived and breathed the company that built them. Brockway built rugged, custom-heavy trucks from 1912, and in 1968, Overdrive magazine put one on the cover and called it the most rugged truck in the world. Drivers in the Northeast were fiercely loyal because Brockway barely changed its designs, which meant the fleet could stock one set of parts and keep trucks running for decades. Mack bought Brockway in 1956, but let it run as its own division, husky dog and all. Then it ended, and it ended ugly. Labor troubles boiled over into a bitter strike in early 1977, and Mack, dealing with its own financial losses, made a cold decision. It closed Brockway. The very last Brockway rolled out on June 8, 1977, 102 years after the first one, and an entire town watched its identity die on a factory floor. But here's the part that gives me chills. 1 year later, they were filming the movie Convoy, and in one scene, a loaded Brockway tractor tips over and topples onto its side during a sharp turn. It wasn't fully scripted. The truck genuinely went over, and they left it in the film. So there it is, captured on movie screens across America, a Brockway lying on its side, kicked and abandoned while the hero drives off in his Mack, the exact truck whose company had just been killed by Mack, lying dead in the road. Nobody planned that symbolism. It just happened, the way the saddest things usually do. The dog that wouldn't die, immortalized in the moment it fell. Number 2 isn't a single truck, it's a gut punch that a whole generation of drivers felt. Two of the biggest names in American manufacturing deciding that big trucks weren't worth their time. Stop and think about how strange this actually is. General Motors and Ford Motor Company are two of the largest, most powerful vehicle manufacturers the world has ever produced. They motorized America. They had the engineering, the money, the factories, and the dealer networks to build anything they wanted. And both of them looked hard at the Class 8 heavy truck market, the business of building the tractors that haul this country's freight, and decided to quit. GMC handed its heavy truck operations to a Volvo joint venture in 1987 and walked away. Ford sold its heavy truck line to Freightliner in 1997 and walked away. Neither company failed at it. They chose to leave because the margins were thin and the competition was brutal, and they had easier money to make selling pickups and cars to families. For drivers, it meant the bow tie and the blue oval, two badges they'd trusted their entire lives, simply vanished from the front of a road tractor, permanently. You can still buy a GMC pickup and a Ford pickup today. You cannot buy a new GMC or Ford Class 8 highway truck, and you never will again. The giants didn't die. They just decided the hardest, proudest end of the trucking business wasn't worth the trouble, and they left it to the specialists. That rejection still stings for the drivers who remember when the biggest names in Detroit built real trucks. The number one vanished truck in America isn't a brand, it's an entire species, the cabover engine truck. The cabover, the flat-faced rig where the driver sits right on top of the engine with no hood out front, once ruled the American interstate. And today, it's all but extinct here. And the story of how it died is the single most important law most drivers have never heard the name of. Go back before 1982. Federal law limited the total length of the trunk and trailer combined, the whole rig, bumper to bumper. So every foot of tractor was a foot you couldn't use for freight. The cabover was the answer, because by putting the cab over the engine and eliminating the hood, you got a much shorter tractor, which meant a longer trailer, which meant more freight and more money on every single load. That's why the interstates of the 60s and 70s were an ocean of cabovers. Kenworth 100s, Peterbilt 352s, white Freightliners, Mack F models, GMC Astros, every one of them flat-nosed because the law made length precious and the cabover saved it. Drivers paid a real price for that efficiency. A cabover rode rough, sitting right over the front axle. It was loud, with the engine roaring between the seats. And to check that engine, you tilted the entire cab forward, dumping everything loose in the truck onto the windshield. A ritual every cabover driver remembers and nobody misses. Then came the Surface Transportation Assistance Act of 1982. It changed one thing that changed everything. It regulated the length of the trailer independently and removed the limit on the overall combination, meaning the tractor's length no longer counted against your freight. Overnight, the cabover's entire reason for existing evaporated. Now, a driver could run a long-nose conventional with its smoother ride, its quieter cab, its room for a real sleeper, and pull just as much freight as the cabover ever could. There was no reason to suffer anymore. The switch was brutal and fast. By the late 80s, one truck maker reported the cabover segment had collapsed by about 90%. Kenworth ended the K100 in 2002. Peterbilt built the last 362 in 2005. And that was it. The truck that defined the golden age of trucking, the shape from every trucking movie and every childhood memory of watching the interstate, the rig that BJ and the Bear made famous and a million owner-operators customized into rolling art, disappeared from American long haul almost entirely, killed not by a better truck, but by a single sentence in a federal transportation bill. The cabover still rules in Europe and Asia and Australia, where the roads are tight and the length laws still bite. But in America, it's a ghost, hauled to truck shows on trailers, photographed by drivers who smile when they see one because it takes them straight back. Every veteran on this channel drove one, or wanted one, or cursed one on a rough road at 2 in the morning, and now they're simply gone. That's the #1 vanished truck in America, because it wasn't one rig that died, it was the end of an entire era, signed into law with a pen. Before we roll out, one bonus, because not every old name on this road is a tombstone. Autocar started in Pittsburgh in 1897, which makes it the oldest surviving motor vehicle brand in the entire Western Hemisphere, older than Ford, older than everybody. White bought Autocar back in 1953, and for decades it looked like Autocar would just be another name absorbed and eventually erased, the way Diamond T and Reo and Sterling were. It got passed to Volvo when White collapsed. It nearly faded into a badge. But in 2001, Autocar was pulled back out and re-established as an independent, American-owned company. And today, it built severe-duty trucks in Birmingham, Alabama, the tough vocational rigs that haul garbage and mix concrete and work the oil fields. 127 years after it started, Autocar is still here, still American, still building trucks under its own name, while nearly every brand on this list is a memory. So there's your reminder. The road took a lot of legends, but every once in a while, one of them refuses to die. That's 20 legends gone, plus one that beat the odds. From a wagon builder that predated the highways to the flat-nosed cabover that a single law wiped off the map. And notice how they died, because the pattern tells you something. Almost none of these trucks failed. They got merged into oblivion, or bought and strangled, or abandoned by giants chasing easier money, or killed by a change in the rules nobody voted on. The trucks were fine. It was everything around them that changed. So now I want to hear from you, because you drove these. Which one do you miss the most? The cabover you cursed and loved? A Diamond T so pretty you washed it twice a week? A Brockway Husky on the hood? Drop it in the comments. Tell us what you drove and what it meant, because a younger driver is going to read it and finally understand what the road used to look like. And if this ride meant something to you, subscribe. It's free, and it keeps these trucks from being forgotten. Until next time,